Imagine you are a gold merchant in Cairo. The year is 1324, and business by any reasonable measure is good. Egypt sits at the center of the medieval world's most lucrative trade networks, and gold, the currency of kings, the measure of all wealth, the metal that makes empires possible, flows through your city in quantities that make Cairo the richest trading hub on earth. You know the price of gold, the way you know your own heartbeat. You have built your life around it. Your father built his life around it. The price does not change. The price cannot change. And then, one morning in the early spring, you hear something that makes no sense at all. There is a man coming, a king from somewhere south and west, beyond the Sahara, from a kingdom so distant and so vast that most people in Cairo have only the vaguest notion it exists. He is on his way to Mecca, performing the Hajj, the great pilgrimage that every Muslim is called to make, at least once in their lifetime. And he is bringing, the rumors say, an entourage of 60,000 people. 60,000 people, soldiers and servants and scholars, and poets and architects and cooks and slaves and courtiers, stretching across the desert in a column so long that by the time its head reaches the city gates, its tail is still a day's march behind, and at its center, carried on a litter of pure gold, beneath a canopy of silk, surrounded by 500 slaves, each holding a golden staff, is the richest human being who has ever lived. His name is Mansa Musa, and he is about to accidentally destroy your economy. To understand how one man's generosity could collapse an entire region's economy, you first have to understand who Mansa Musa actually was, because the history books, when they mention him at all, tend to reduce him to a single image. A black king sitting on a throne, holding a nugget of gold, surrounded by wealth so staggering it defies comprehension. That image is real, but it tells only a fraction of the story. Mansa Musa was the 10th Mansa, the emperor of the Mali Empire, which at its height in the early 14th century was the largest empire in West Africa and one of the largest in the world, stretching across nearly 2 million square kilometers of territory that encompassed parts of what are now Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Mauritania. It controlled the most productive gold fields on earth, the mines of Bambouk and Bouré, which at their peak were producing more than half of all the gold in the entire known world. It controlled the salt trade routes across the Sahara, the trans-Saharan caravan networks that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, and the great trading cities of Timbuktu and Djenné, which were not, as European cartographers of the era imagined, remote and primitive outposts, but sophisticated urban centers with universities, libraries, and manuscript collections that rivaled anything in contemporary Europe. Mansa Musa ruled all of this, and he ruled it at a moment when the Mali Empire's gold production was so enormous, so overwhelming, that modern economists who've attempted to calculate his net worth have largely given up and simply declared him, in the most literal sense possible, incalculably wealthy. Some estimates place his fortune, adjusted for modern values, at $400 billion. Others say that figure is too low. The truth is that the Mali Empire's control of medieval gold production was so complete, so dominant, that comparing it to modern wealth is a category error, like asking how many dollars the sun is worth. Gold was not just Mansa Musa's asset. In the medieval world, gold was the basis of all monetary systems. the foundation of all international trade, the measure against which all other value was calculated. Controlling half the world's gold supply did not make Mansa Musa rich in the way that a modern billionaire is rich. It made him something closer to a god of economics. And in 1324, he decided to go on holiday. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and Mansa Musa, a devout Muslim, had long planned to make it. But Mansa Musa did not do things quietly. He did not do things modestly. He did not do things in a way that left any room for doubt about who he was and what his empire represented. And so, when he set out from his capital city of Niani in early 1324, he brought with him an entourage that contemporary sources describe in terms that historians spent centuries assuming were exaggerated. They were not exaggerated. 60,000 men in his retinue, including 12,000 slaves dressed in silk and brocade, 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust, 500 slaves, each carrying a golden staff weighing around 6 pounds, a personal retinue of courtiers, scholars, physicians, poets, and architects, horses draped in cloth of gold, and Mansa Musa himself, riding at the center of this extraordinary procession, conducting the business of his empire from the road, receiving ambassadors, and dispensing justice, and corresponding with governors across 2 million square kilometers of territory, all while crossing one of the world's most hostile deserts on his way to perform a religious obligation. The column took an entire day to pass any given point on the road. Every Friday, wherever the procession happened to be, Mansa Musa ordered a mosque built so that he could perform his Friday prayers in a proper place of worship. He built mosques across the Sahara, the way other travelers leave footprints. When the procession reached Cairo, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad, received Mansa Musa with all the ceremony due to a visiting monarch, and Mansa Musa, in a gesture that caused a diplomatic incident still being discussed by historians, initially refused to prostrate himself before the Sultan, on the grounds that he prostrated himself only before God. He eventually performed a modified bow, a compromise that satisfied neither party entirely, but avoided an outright rupture. It was, in miniature, a preview of the chaos that was about to unfold. Because Mansa Musa, in Cairo and along every stop of his route, gave away gold, not carefully, not strategically. He gave it away the way the rest of us might hand out business cards, freely, generously, almost carelessly, to beggars in the street, and scholars in the mosques, and merchants in the bazaars, and officials who caught his eye, and holy men who impressed him with their learning. He gave away so much gold in Cairo alone that he single-handedly crashed the Egyptian economy for the next 12 years. Not metaphorically, not as an exaggeration, literally measurably, documented in contemporary Arabic sources, the price of gold in Egypt collapsed by as much as 25% and did not recover for over a decade. To understand why this happened, you need to understand one of the most fundamental principles of economics. A principle so basic that it seems almost too simple, and yet one that has caused financial catastrophe after financial catastrophe across the entire span of human history. When the supply of something increases dramatically and suddenly, its value drops, not gradually, not gently, catastrophically, if the increase is large enough. Cairo in 1324 had a gold economy that had been carefully, organically calibrated over generations. The amount of gold in circulation, the prices of goods, the wages of workers, the cost of imports, all of it was built around a relatively stable gold supply. And then Mansa Musa arrived with 80 camels carrying 24,000 pounds of gold and started handing it out to everyone he met. The amount of gold in circulation in Cairo did not increase gradually. It did not give merchants and traders and the broader economy time to adjust. It exploded almost overnight, and the price of gold, the foundation of every transaction in the medieval Islamic world, collapsed with it. Merchants who had built their businesses around the stable value of gold suddenly found that their savings were worth a fraction of what they had been worth a month earlier. Workers whose wages were denominated in gold found that those wages bought less than before. The entire price structure of the Egyptian economy lurched and staggered and took 12 years to find its footing again. Mansa Musa, to his credit, eventually understood what he had done. On his return journey from Mecca, passing through Cairo again, he attempted to correct the damage by borrowing gold back from Egyptian merchants, at interest, deliberately taking gold out of circulation to reduce the supply and allow prices to recover. It was, in a very real sense, the first recorded instance of a ruler attempting to conduct monetary policy to correct an economic shock of his own creation. It helped eventually, but the damage took more than a decade to fully heal. But here is what the story of Mansa Musa's Hajj really teaches us. And this is the part that connects directly to the world you live in today, to the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions, and the Bank of England's quantitative easing programs, and every other mechanism by which modern governments try to manage the impossible complexity of a global economy. The most dangerous economic force in history has never been greed. It has never been war. It has never been famine or drought or plague, though all of these have caused immense economic suffering. The most dangerous economic force in history is sudden, uncontrolled abundance. When too much of something enters an economic system too quickly, the system cannot adjust. The same thing happened when Spanish conquistadors flooded Europe with New World silver in the 16th century. Prices across the continent rose so fast and so unpredictably that entire social classes were wiped out. Governments were destabilized, and the economic order of medieval Europe was permanently disrupted. The same principle applies when central banks print money too quickly, when new technologies suddenly make entire industries obsolete overnight, when a single company gains enough market dominance to distort an entire sector. The mechanism is always the same. The scale changes. The principle does not. Mansa Musa did not intend to destroy Egypt's economy. He was being generous. He was being pious. He was doing what any devout Muslim ruler of his era was expected to do, giving to the poor, supporting scholars and mosques, demonstrating through visible generosity the wealth and virtue of his empire. The economic catastrophe that followed was not malicious. It was not even careless by the standards of his time, when nobody had yet developed the conceptual tools to understand what he was actually doing to the money supply. He was simply too rich for the world to absorb, and the world paid for it. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, one of the most important maps of the medieval world, depicts Mansa Musa sitting on his throne in the center of Africa, holding a golden orb, so large and so dominant that he anchors the entire African continent on the map. European cartographers, who'd never been within 3,000 miles of Mali, knew his name, knew his face, knew his wealth, because the economic shockwave of his single pilgrimage had rippled outward across the entire medieval world and was still being felt 50 years later. His journey to Mecca had put the Mali Empire on the map, literally, in a way that no military conquest or diplomatic mission could have achieved. And yet, within a century of his death, the Mali Empire itself had begun to collapse, weakened by succession disputes and external pressure, and the very trade networks whose profits had made it great. Timbuktu, the jewel of his empire, the city of 100,000 people, and a university that housed 25,000 students, and a library of nearly 1 million manuscripts, fell to invaders in 1591. Most of those manuscripts were destroyed or scattered. The rest were hidden, buried in the desert, sealed in clay jars, concealed in the walls of houses, by scholars who understood that they were watching something irreplaceable disappear and did the only thing they could think of to save it. Some of those manuscripts are still being recovered today. Scholars in Mali and around the world are working to digitize and preserve hundreds of thousands of documents that survived, against all probability, the collapse of the empire that produced them. They contain mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, poetry, legal theory, the accumulated intellectual output of a civilization that the rest of the world had largely written off as peripheral, as marginal, as existing only at the edges of the map. They are proof that the story we tell ourselves about where knowledge comes from, about which civilizations mattered and which did not, is incomplete in ways we are only beginning to understand. Mansa Musa crashed Egypt's economy with his generosity. He built mosques across the Sahara on a Friday afternoon. He put his empire on the map of the world so indelibly that European cartographers were still drawing his face 50 years after his death. And then history, as it so often does, with the stories that do not fit neatly into the narratives we prefer, largely forgot him. It should not have, because the lesson of Mansa Musa's Hajj is not really about gold, or about medieval economics, or even about the staggering, almost incomprehensible scale of his wealth. It is about the invisible architecture of the systems we build and depend on, the way that an economy, like a civilization, like an empire, is not a thing but a balance, a constantly negotiated, constantly recalibrated equilibrium between supply and demand, between abundance and scarcity, between the actions of individuals and the responses of systems, too large and too complex for any individual to fully understand. Mansa Musa tipped that balance with gold dust and good intentions. Central banks tip it with interest rates and bond purchases. Tech companies tip it with algorithms and market dominance. The tools are different. The principle is identical. And the consequences of getting it wrong are, as Egypt discovered in 1324, longer and more painful than anyone expects. The richest man who ever lived accidentally broke the world economy, and nobody saw it coming. Nobody ever does. The history that changes how you see the present is rarely the history they taught you in school. Mansa Musa's story is not in most textbooks, but it explains more about how economies work and how they fail than most economics courses ever will. If that's the kind of history you want more of, this channel is where it lives. The next story is already waiting for you.